what if the reason you are so deeply, fundamentally exhausted isn't actually because you're doing too much?
Right.
Like, what if it isn't the commute or the inbox or just that endless string of obligations you have?
Yeah, the everyday stuff.
Exactly. What if the exhaustion you feel, that heavy, kind of humming anxiety that's constantly vibrating right behind your ribs, is actually because you genuinely believe you're in charge of the universe?
Or, well, at least the universe of your own life.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we live in this era that preaches a very, very specific gospel. And that gospel is basically you are the author of your own destiny. You write the script.
Direct the action.
You are the main character. But I mean, let's be honest for a second here. The pen is getting incredibly heavy.
Oh, absolutely. It's a profound, really existential kind of fatigue. I mean, we are observing an entire generation of people who have done everything, quote unquote, right.
Yeah, they checked all the boxes.
Exactly. They've built the careers, they've curated the perfect lifestyles, accumulated all the milestones, and yet they are just completely burned out.
Completely.
And it's not a physical tiredness. It's not something a weekend of sleep can cure.
Right.
It is the exhaustion of carrying a psychological weight that the human nervous system was never, ever actually designed to bear.
Which is exactly the friction we are tearing into today. We've got a really fascinating stack of sources on the table for this deep dive.
We do.
It's this comprehensive manifesto alongside some deeply personal reflections and a cross-reference guide that, honestly, it attempts to build a bridge I have never seen constructed quite like this before.
It's unique, for sure.
Yeah. We are looking at a synthesis between ancient Islamic theology, specifically Quranic wisdom, and the bedrock of Western philosophy and modern psychology.
Right, and the overarching framework we're analyzing from these sources, it's called the Entrusted Living Declaration.
The Entrusted Living Declaration.
Yeah, and what makes this material so compelling is that it doesn't just, offer up these spiritual platitudes. It takes concepts that have been siloed in completely different academic and theological corners for centuries.
And forces them to talk to each other.
Exactly. It forces them into dialogue. We are talking about mapping 7th century theological concepts directly onto 21st century neurobiology.
Which is just wild. So our mission today is to walk through the 5 transformative goals that are laid out in this declaration. We're going to look at discovering who we actually are, our role in serving humanity, viewing life as a sacred trust, finding peace by releasing outcomes, and finally, using a very specific practical rhythm of remembrance in our daily actions.
There's a lot of ground to cover.
It is, yeah. But I want to start right at the bedrock with the first goal, because it completely flips our modern understanding of identity right on its head.
It really does.
The sources argue that our current crisis of meaning is actually a crisis of authorship. And I kept wondering, where did we get this idea that we have to invent ourselves from scratch in the first place?
Well, to understand the water we're swimming in, the sources point us back to the 17th century, specifically to the French philosopher René Descartes.
Oh.
Yeah, he's famous for that maxim, I think, therefore I am.
Right, right.
Now, philosophically, Descartes was basically trying to find an absolute foundation for knowledge. He literally stripped away everything he could possibly doubt.
Like the physical world, his senses.
His memories, all of it. Until he was left with only one undeniable truth, which was the fact that he was doubting meant there was a thinking mind doing the doubting.
It's like the ultimate philosophical reset button.
It is.
But, I mean, it sounds incredibly isolating.
Well, it was. And philosophers called this the turn to the subject. Because prior to this era, meaning and identity were generally understood to be external.
Like outside of yourself.
Right. You belong to a community or a cosmos or a divine order. Your identity was something you received. But after Descartes, and as the Enlightenment progressed, the center of gravity shifted entirely to the individual.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because fast forward a few centuries, and this philosophical seed has bloomed into this modern cultural mandate that your identity is something you must constantly invent.
Construct, defend, yeah.
I see that everywhere. It's the water we swim in. Build your personal brand. Define your truth. Manifest your reality.
It's everywhere.
On the surface, it sounds incredibly empowering. It sounds like the ultimate freedom. But if I am completely honest, it feels like a trap.
How so?
Because if I am the sole author of my worth, then any failure, like bad quarter at work or a relationship ending or even, a post that doesn't get enough engagement,
Right.
it doesn't just mean I made a mistake. It threatens to annihilate my actual identity.
Oh, wow.
Like, I am only as valuable as my last successful act of self-creation.
Exactly. That is the exact trap. And the sources contrast this incredibly fragile, highly anxious Western model with a radically different foundation found in Islamic theology.
Okay, tell me about that.
So the text highlights a specific verse from the Quran, chapter 17, verse 70, which states, "We have certainly honored the children of Adam."
Honored the children of Adam.
Yes.
Oh.
And the implication here is just massive. It means that human dignity is not an achievement. It is a pre-existing condition.
Wait, really? Dignity precedes effort.
Exactly. Dignity precedes effort. And the text uses this Arabic term, an Abdullah.
Abdullah. Can you break down what that means in this context?
Yeah, so Abdullah translates to a servant or worshiper of God. And in the context of this framework, it means you are an entrusted servant created on purpose by an ultimate creator.
So my worth isn't up for debate.
No. Your worth is not a conclusion drawn from your resume or your physical appearance or your social standing. It's an immutable gift. You do not perform in order to earn your worth. You perform from a place of already established worth.
Okay, that completely changes the underlying psychology of how someone moves through the world. If I know my worth is settled, I imagine my nervous system would look entirely different than someone who is like constantly auditioning for their value.
Oh, night and day. And this is where the bridge to Western psychology becomes so illuminating. The sources bring in the research of Dr. Brené Brown to validate this ancient concept.
Oh, I love her work.
Right. So Dr. Brown spent decades collecting qualitative data on vulnerability and shame. And she gave the scientific community a clear vocabulary for distinguishing guilt from shame.
Right, because they aren't the same thing.
Exactly. Guilt is the realization I did something bad. It's focused on behavior. Shame is the internalizing of that failure to mean I am bad.
I am bad. Wow.
Yeah. Shame is a crisis of identity.
And if you are the author of your own identity, like we were just talking about, every failure risks becoming shame. You don't just lose the game, you become a loser.
Precisely. And Dr. Brown's data reveals that the most resilient, courageous, and effective people in her studies all share one core belief.
Which is?
A profound sense of their own worthiness. They operate from a baseline of I am enough.
I am enough.
Yeah. This psychological state of settled worth is the exact modern equivalent of the theological concept of granted dignity.
That makes perfect sense.
When you are not constantly expending all this psychological energy to defend your ego, you have vastly more cognitive and emotional resources available to actually engage with life, take risks, and connect with others.
That's incredible. The text also brings in Viktor Frankl, which I found totally fascinating.
Oh yes, logotherapy.
Right. Frankl was a psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust, specifically the Auschwitz concentration camp, and he developed this whole school of psychotherapy called logotherapy. What is the connection between his work and this idea of settled identity?
Well, Frankl observed that the prisoners who were most likely to survive the unimaginable horrors of the camps were those who maintained a sense of meaning. But crucially, Frankl insisted that meaning is found, not invented.
Found, not invented.
Right. He identified a phenomenon he called the existential vacuum.
Which is what exactly?
It's this widespread feeling of emptiness and pointlessness in modern life. And he argued this vacuum occurs when people try to manufacture their own meaning from scratch.
Oh.
According to Frankl, meaning must point to something beyond the self. It has to be discovered in the world, in relationship to others, or in relationship to the divine. You don't fabricate it out of thin air. You uncover what is already there.
That completely aligns with another concept mentioned in the sources. The text references Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, and his concept of individuation.
Yes.
But it contrasts Jung's idea with the Islamic concept of the fitra. Let's unpack that. Because I always thought Jung was all about becoming who you truly are in a sort of, I don't know, self-creation way.
It's a very common misconception. Jungian individuation is not about creating a false performative persona. In fact, Jung believed that psychological suffering often stems from over-identifying with the persona, the mask we wear for society.
Ah, I see.
Individuation is the arduous process of stripping away those masks, integrating the conscious and unconscious, and returning to the total authentic self.
Okay, so how does that map to the fitra?
Well, the sources argue that this psychological journey mirrors the Islamic theological concept of returning to the fitra. The fitra is the innate, God-given original nature of the human being.
So it's the baseline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is the pure, untainted baseline before society, trauma, and ego begin to distort us.
So the journey isn't about climbing a mountain to build a monument to myself. It's more like an archaeological dig to uncover the dignified self that was buried under years of conditioning.
That's a great way to put it.
That is a profound paradigm shift. But, the sources point out that functionally, most of us don't actually live this way, even if we claim to be religious or spiritual.
Unfortunately, no.
There is this incredibly striking analogy in the text about the unholy trinity. Can we walk through that? Because reading it honestly felt like holding up a mirror.
Yeah, it's very confronting. So the author suggests that while many people might profess a belief in a single unifying God, theologically speaking, their functional day-to-day lives tell a very different story. We actually divide our worship among three distinct masters. First, we look to God, or some vague concept of the universe, for ultimate abstract meaning.
Okay, that's one.
Second, we worship what the author calls the material God, our careers, our bank accounts, our investments, to provide us with a sense of safety and security.
Ouch. Yeah.
And third, we worship people, our peers, our industry, social media algorithms to provide us with a validation and significance.
It's like we are hedging our bets. We say we trust God, but just in case, we make sure our portfolio is perfect so we feel safe, and we curate our Instagram so we feel loved.
Precisely. And that functional association is what shatters our peace. The lips affirm unity, but the nervous system lives in constant fragmentation.
Because you're serving three masters.
Yes, and you're constantly trying to appease three different, often contradictory masters. The material God demands that you sacrifice your time and health to earn more so you can feel safe. The social God demands that you conform and impress so you can feel significant.
So the ego is just an overdrive.
Complete overdrive. It constantly scans the environment, compares you to others, and braces for impact. The human body literally carries the tension of trying to secure multiple thrones.
I hear that, and my shoulders actually drop just thinking about letting go of those other two masters.
Yeah.
But I have to push back here for a second.
Okay, go for it.
If I accept this premise, if I completely let go of the need for social validation and I stop relying on my material success to prove my worth,
Yeah.
if my dignity is completely settled by God and I don't have to build my identity, doesn't that just make me incredibly passive?
No.
I mean, why should I even get off the couch? If I'm already enough, why would I strive for excellence at work? Why would I try to build anything of value? It sounds like a recipe for apathy.
That is the most common friction point high achievers experience when they encounter this framework. They fear that their anxiety is the only thing keeping them productive.
It feels like that sometimes.
It does. But the psychological reality is entirely different. Settled worth doesn't eliminate action. It purifies the motivation behind the action.
How so? Like, what does that actually look like?
Think about the concept of fuel. When your identity is on the line, you are burning dirty fuel. You are driven by the fear of collapse, the fear of judgment, the desperation to prove you matter.
Yeah, that's a very stressful way to live.
Exactly. That fuel burns extremely hot, and it can drive you to achieve massive things, but it creates toxic exhaust. It ruins your health, it ruins your relationships, and it leaves you internally hollow.
Like you reach the top of the mountain and realize there's nothing there.
Exactly. But when you feel existentially safe, when you know your baseline dignity is untouchable, you switch to clean fuel. You aren't acting out of a desperate fear of irrelevance. You are acting out of gratitude, curiosity, and a desire to contribute.
Oh, that's a huge difference.
Right. Your effort becomes a creative expression of the gifts you've been given, rather than a frantic defensive maneuver to secure your right to exist. And the research actually shows that people operating from this place of intrinsic security sustain higher levels of excellence over the long term without the burnout.
Okay, that makes sense. It changes the source of the drive. I'm not running from worthlessness. I'm operating within worthiness.
Exactly.
Which presents the next logical question. If I have this clean fuel, what am I actually supposed to do with it? Like, if I'm not building a monument to myself, what is the goal of my actions?
And this pivots us beautifully into the third goal of the Declaration.
Right, which redefines our relationship with everything we possess. The sources introduce the concept of life as a sacred trust.
Yes. In Islamic theology, this concept is known as the amana.
Amana.
The text references a deeply poetic, almost cosmological verse from the Quran, chapter 33, verse 72. It describes a moment before human existence where God offered this massive, weighty trust to the heavens, the earth, and the mountains.
The mountains.
Yeah, and these massive, enduring creations declined to bear it. They were terrified of the responsibility.
Mhm.
But the human being stepped forward and accepted it.
Okay, so what exactly is this terrifying trust that a mountain refused, but a human accepted?
It is everything.
Yeah.
Your consciousness, your intellect, your physical body, the time you have on this earth, your financial resources, your specific talents, your sphere of influence.
Wow, okay.
The fundamental paradigm shift of the Ivana is the realization that none of it actually belongs to you. You are not the owner. You are simply a steward, a trustee, placed in temporary care of these assets.
I love how the sources ground this very lofty cosmological idea with the work of Cal Newport.
Oh, his work is perfect here.
Yeah, he's a computer science professor, but he writes extensively about the intersection of technology, work, and culture. His concept of deep work and craftsmanship bridges perfectly to the Yamana.
It really does. Newport argues against the modern passion hypothesis, the idea that you should figure out what you're passionate about and then demand that the world pay you for it.
Yeah.
Instead, he advocates for a craftsman mindset. You focus relentlessly on what value you can produce for the world.
So it's outward focused.
Exactly. When you view your cognitive abilities and your time as a sacred trust, your daily work is no longer about proving your superiority over your coworkers or climbing a corporate ladder just for the view. Excellence becomes a daily act of devotion. It is the faithful stewardship of the specific cognitive tools you were handed.
And this isn't just an Islamic concept, right? The sources highlight that this is a universal truth found across Abrahamic traditions. They point directly to the parable of the talents in the Bible.
Yes, it is a very famous narrative. A wealthy master is going on a long journey. Before he leaves, he entrusts his property to his servants. He gives 5 talents, which was a massive sum of money, basically a measure of weight in gold or silver, to one servant, 2 to another, and 1 to the last, each according to their unique abilities.
And then the master leaves.
The master then leaves.
So the master owns the wealth, the servants are just the executors.
Correct. And when the master returns, he doesn't evaluate them on how much wealth they ultimately possess, because it's not theirs.
That's a crucial distinction.
Extremely crucial. He evaluates them entirely on their faithfulness in managing what they were given. The servants who invested and grew the trust are commended. The servant who buried the talent out of fear is condemned.
Right.
The framework of the Amana operates on the exact same logic. God is the grantor of the trust. We are the trustees.
You know, the sources offer an incredibly tangible analogy here that finally made this click for me. The author talks about a close, wealthy friend who was setting up a legal trust fund for his children.
Yeah, this is a great analogy.
And this friend made the author the legal trustee. Let's break down the mechanics of a trust fund because it perfectly illustrates the psychology of the Amana. As a trustee, you are given the legal authority to manage millions of dollars. You are making high-stakes decisions about investments, real estate, asset allocation.
But the critical distinction is the liability and the ownership.
Yes, if the stock market crashes tomorrow, as the trustee, you might be frustrated that the portfolio shrank, sure, but you don't feel the existential, gut-wrenching panic of a man who just lost his own life savings.
Right, because it's not yours.
Exactly.
Yep.
You carry zero personal liability for the wealth itself, and you don't own a single dime of the profits. The wealth belongs to the grantor, and the benefits go to the beneficiaries.
And this completely reorients the burden of human existence. When you internalize that God is the grantor, you are the trustee, and the beneficiaries are your family, your community, and the world at large, the pressure drops immensely.
It really does.
You are simply an executor. You are an actor improvising your part on a grand stage. But you remember that God is the director, and he owns the theater. You don't have to worry about whether the theater makes rent. You just have to deliver your lines faithfully.
Think about how radically this reframes the concept of ambition. In modern corporate culture, ambition is almost entirely synonymous with a selfish grab for power or status or market share.
Yeah, it has a very negative connotation in that light.
The text brings up some historical archetypes from the Quran to illustrate the dark side of ambition. There is Pharaoh, who represents the ultimate unchecked ego, the lust for absolute political domination and power. He literally declares himself a god.
And then there is Korun.
Right, Karun.
He represents the lust for infinite wealth and status, hoarding treasures and believing his wealth is entirely the result of his own genius.
Those archetypes represent the ultimate failure of stewardship, don't they?
Exactly. They mistook the trust for ownership.
Mm.
But under the framework of the Amana, ambition is not a dirty word. If you have been entrusted with exceptional leadership skills or a brilliant analytical mind, or significant financial resources. Your ambition to deploy those assets at the highest possible level is not a selfish grab for glory.
It's what you're supposed to do.
It is a mandatory duty of stewardship. You are required to maximize the return on the master's assets for the benefit of humanity.
It changes the game you were playing. The text brings in Simon Sinek's work on the infinite game here. Sinek differentiates between finite games like football or chess, which have known players, fixed rules, and an agreed-upon endpoint to declare a winner. Finite games are exhausting because you are constantly trying to end the game by winning. But business, politics, and life itself, those are infinite games. The rules change, players come and go, and the objective isn't to win because you can't, quote-unquote, win life or business.
No, you can't.
The objective is to keep the game going.
And stewardship is the ultimate infinite game. Your horizon extends far beyond your own quarterly review or even your own lifespan. You are managing the trust to leave the environment, the community, and the organization healthier than you found it, knowing full well that you will eventually return the trust to the grantor.
Right.
You aren't playing to beat the person next to you. You're playing to fulfill your specific fiduciary duty.
Okay, I love the trust fund analogy. I love the idea of being an executor in an infinite game, but let me bring us back down to the messy reality of being a human being.
Okay, let's go there.
Let's say I fully embrace this. I know I am a steward. I know I don't own my talents or my time. I go to work, I build a phenomenal project for a client, I pour my best faithful effort into it,
Right.
and the client completely rejects it.
Right. It happens.
Or the market shifts and the company goes under. Even if I know I'm just a steward, I am still going to lose sleep over that. I am still going to feel a massive spike of stress. Why, if I'm just the manager, why does the failure of the project still feel like a knot in my stomach?
Because there is a gap between accepting stewardship conceptually and practicing it physiologically.
Yeah.
We might admit that we are managing a trust, but we still desperately, instinctively try to control the results of our management. We confuse the effort, which is the only thing we actually control, with the outcome, which belongs entirely to the grantor.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And this specific friction is what the fourth goal of the declaration is designed to solve. It is the necessity of releasing outcomes.
The sources refer to this as the geometry of peace, which is a beautiful phrase. To explain it, they introduce the Islamic concept of tawakkul. How does tawakkul differ from just, crossing your fingers and hoping for the best?
Yeah, it's not just hoping. Tawakkul translates to complete unwavering reliance on God, but with a massive caveat. It happens after you have done everything in your power.
Oh, okay.
There's a famous tradition of the Prophet Muhammad where a man asks if he should tie his camel or trust in God. The Prophet replies, "Tie your camel, then put your trust in Allah."
Tie your camel. I love that.
It's so practical. Tawakkul is not passivity. It is maximal effort combined with zero attachment to the result.
So peace in this framework is not a mood. It isn't listening to a meditation app and feeling calm for 10 minutes.
No. The framework defines peace as alignment. It is structural. It is the absence of internal fragmentation. You achieve this geometry of peace when you draw a hard, impenetrable line between your effort and the outcome. You obsess over the quality of the effort, and you become entirely neutral toward the outcome.
I read that and immediately thought of Stoicism. I mean, you look at the writings of Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius's Meditations or modern proponents like Ryan Holiday.
Absolutely.
The absolute bedrock of Stoic philosophy is the dichotomy of control. You meticulously separate what is up to you, your judgments, your impulses, your desires, from what is not up to your body, your property, your reputation. You focus 100% of your energy on the former and cultivate indifference to the latter. It sounds identical to tawakkul.
The mechanism is very similar, and Stoicism is a brilliant psychological tool for building resilience. It's highly effective at stopping people from wasting energy on things they cannot change.
Right.
But the sources highlight a profound, almost devastating limitation of Stoicism when compared to the Islamic framework.
Let's dig into that. Where does Stoicism fall short?
Well, Stoicism requires you to surrender your attachment to outcomes, but what are you surrendering to?
That's a good question.
In the Stoic worldview, you are surrendering to fate, to the logos, to the cold impersonal mechanics of an indifferent universe. The Stoic concept of amor fati, loving your fate, often requires a sort of psychological callousing.
Right, like toughening up.
Exactly. You grit your teeth, you accept that the universe doesn't care about you, and you endure it with dignity. It can be a very cold, lonely, and fundamentally defensive posture.
You're just dropping your hopes into a black hole and walking away.
Precisely. But the Islamic concept of tawakkul offers a radical upgrade. Islam does not ask you to surrender your outcomes to avoid. It asks you to surrender them to Ar-Rahman, the most compassionate, the most merciful.
Oh, that's beautiful.
You are not dropping your desires into a black hole. You are placing them into the hands of an intimately loving, infinitely wise guardian. A guardian who knows you better than you know yourself, who created you on purpose, and who is described as the best of planners.
That shifts the entire emotional landscape. Surrender goes from being a defensive coping mechanism to a relational embrace. It's the difference between bracing for a car crash and falling backward into the arms of a parent.
What a great way to describe it.
To explore the internal psychological mechanics of why this is so hard, the text brings in Michael A. Singer's work. He wrote a wildly popular book called The Untethered Soul. Singer talks about something he calls the inner roommate.
Yes. Anyone who has ever tried to sit in silence for 5 minutes knows the inner roommate.
Oh, definitely.
It is that incessant, neurotic, chattering voice in your head that is constantly narrating your life. It judges people, it rehearses arguments that haven't happened yet, it worries about the future, it obsesses over past mistakes.
It's exhausting.
It is. Singer points out that this voice's primary function is an illusion of protection. It tries to control the external world so that the internal world feels safe.
And the sources map this inner roommate directly to an Islamic concept, right? The nafs.
Specifically, the commanding lower self. In Islamic anthropology, the human being is not a monolith. We have different layers. The nafs is the ego-driven, reactive, survival-oriented layer of our psyche.
Okay.
It feeds on fear, appetite, and control. When you try to practice tawakkul and release an outcome, the nafs goes into absolute panic mode. To the ego, losing control feels indistinguishable from death.
But the text points out we are not just the nafs, we also possess the ruh.
The ruh is the soul, the divine breath, the highest God-oriented layer of our being. While the nafs seeks safety through domination and control, the ruh seeks safety through nearness to its creator.
I see.
So in that moment when the project fails or the market crashes, there's a literal battle inside you. The ego is screaming to seize control, to manipulate, to panic. But if you can release the outcome, the nafs is starved and the ruh exhales. The soul finds its natural alignment.
I want to focus on that physical sensation for a second because the sources are very explicit that this isn't just high-minded philosophy. It is an embodied physiological experience.
Absolutely.
How do I know physically when my nafs has hijacked the wheel and I am out of alignment? The text points to a verse in the Quran, chapter 6, verse 125, which describes a literal tightness and constriction in the chest.
It is the biological marker of misalignment. When you try to author an outcome that does not belong to you, your nervous system registers a state of threat. Your breathing becomes shallow, your shoulders hike up toward your ears, your chest literally tightens. You're experiencing the physical friction of fighting reality.
I was reading this and a completely different scientific field popped into my head, thermodynamics.
Oh, really?
Yeah, specifically the second law of thermodynamics, which states that closed systems naturally tend toward entropy, toward chaos and disorder. Think about dropping a jar of marbles on the floor.
Okay.
They scatter everywhere. That is the natural physics of the universe. Now imagine you try to force all those scattered marbles into a perfect symmetrical pattern on the floor using only your bare hands while people are walking through the room.
That would be impossible. It would require a massive, constant, exhausting infusion of energy.
Exactly. And the moment you stop expending that energy, the pattern collapses. Trying to guarantee a specific outcome in a complex world, trying to control how your boss perceives you, trying to manipulate the stock market, trying to force your children to make certain choices is like trying to organize those marbles.
Wow.
It takes a terrifying amount of energy. You are fighting the physics of reality. No wonder your chest is tight.
That is a phenomenal analogy. Surrender removes the burden of omnipotence. You let the marbles fall where the author of the universe wills them to fall. Your only responsibility, your effort, is how you choose to step around them or gather them up afterward.
But I want to pivot here because there is a danger in this kind of philosophy.
What's the danger?
If I just focus on my own vertical alignment with God and I just let the marbles fall where they may, I could easily become entirely detached from the suffering of the world. I could go retreat to a cabin in the woods and just like vibe with the universe. But the sources are adamant that this is not a solitary path. Which brings us to the second goal of the declaration, balancing the me and we and our role as servants for humanity.
The Entrusted Living framework operates on a grid with two intersecting axes. The vertical axis is exactly what we've been discussing, your relationship, alignment, and surrender to God.
Right.
But it is entirely incomplete without the horizontal axis, your mercy, justice, and compassion toward the rest of creation. The sources argue that isolation actually distorts the human soul. A spirituality that only looks inward eventually rots into narcissism.
We're built for connection. To really hammer this home, the text brings in the work of Dr. Gabor Mate. He is a physician who has done groundbreaking research on the intersection of childhood development, trauma, and chronic illness. How does his clinical work connect to the horizontal axis of this framework?
Dr. Mate explores the fundamental tension every human experiences in childhood between two competing needs, attachment and authenticity. A child absolutely requires attachment to their caregivers to survive physically and emotionally. But a child also has an innate need for authenticity to feel their true feelings, to express their actual fitra.
But those two needs often collide, right?
Frequently. If a child senses that their parents or society will only accept them if they behave a certain way, if they are always happy, if they get straight A's, if they never show anger, the child faces an impossible choice. But survival always wins.
So what happens?
So the child suppresses their authentic self and develops what Mate calls the adaptive self. They learn to perform to secure attachment. They hustle for worthiness.
They become the author of a character designed entirely to please other people.
Yes. And Mate's clinical observation over decades of practice is that this chronic, lifelong suppression of the authentic self in order to appease the horizontal world leads directly to autoimmune diseases, chronic depression, addiction, and a profound sense of alienation. When you perform for worth, your body eventually keeps the score.
Now, overlay the Entrusted Living framework onto that psychology. If your vertical axis is secure, if you deeply fundamentally know that your dignity is settled by God, that you are an honored Abdullah, you no longer have to sacrifice your authenticity to secure attachment.
Exactly.
You don't need to perform the good boy or good corporate soldier routine to earn your right to exist in the community. You are free to engage with the horizontal world not as a beggar looking for validation, but as a wealthy trustee looking to distribute value.
This is a monumental shift in human relation. It moves you from a paradigm of extraction to a paradigm of contribution. And modern psychology confirms this is the key to flourishing. The text cites Martin Seligman, the founder of positive psychology.
Right, Seligman.
Seligman grew frustrated that psychology was only focused on pathology, on what was broken in the mind. He wanted to study what made a mind thrive. He developed the PERMA model.
TERMA. Positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment.
Exactly. And of those five, Seligman found that meaning is the most durable, robust, and resilient source of human well-being. But he defined meaning very specifically. It is the act of belonging to and serving something larger than yourself.
So it's not just about you.
No. Hedonic pleasure, a great meal, a vacation fades quickly. But the deep, resonant well-being of serving humanity sustains us through incredible hardship.
Let's do a thought experiment here. Let's extrapolate this to a macro scale.
Okay, sure.
If an entire culture actually internalized this, that our worth is vertically settled and our horizontal role is stewardship, how would things change? Let's look at corporate leadership. The typical CEO archetype is often driven by massive ego, domination, and a need to be the smartest person in the room. Why? Because their entire identity is tied to the stock price.
Right. But if a leader genuinely internalized the amana, leadership transforms overnight. A trustee does not need to dominate. A trustee empowers. They view the employees not as cogs in a machine to extract value from, but as a sacred trust they are responsible for nurturing.
That's a completely different dynamic. Envy, which poisons so many corporate cultures, softens dramatically. Because if my worth is settled by God, then my neighbor's success does not diminish my dignity. We are not competing for a finite amount of existential value.
Even social media would be completely defanged. The desperate, anxious energy of Instagram or LinkedIn is entirely based on proving you are winning the finite game. If you know you're playing an infinite game of stewardship, you might still post, but the energy is entirely different. You are sharing value, not begging for likes.
Exactly. It's a total shift in energy.
There is a really nuanced philosophical point the sources make here that I want to unpack. When we talk about finding peace and letting go of ego, a lot of Eastern philosophies, like certain interpretations of Buddhism or Advaita Vedanta, aim for the complete dissolution of the self.
Right, yes.
The goal is to realize the self as an illusion and to merge back into the universal ocean of consciousness, like a drop of water returning to the sea. But the sources explicitly push back against this. They state, If we dissolved into universal consciousness, justice would lose its footing. What does that mean? It is a vital distinction. The Islamic framework does not seek the erasure or annihilation of the individual self. It seeks the proper orientation of the self. You must remain a distinct, bounded individual because your actions have real moral weight.
Okay, explain that a bit more.
If you slander someone, or if you steal from a vulnerable person, you cannot simply say, well, the self is an illusion, so no harm was truly done. You remain a distinct entity so that you can be held accountable, so that you can practice justice, and so that you can actively choose compassion. The goal is not to disappear. The goal is to become a perfect, translucent vessel for divine mercy in the world.
You can clearly see the destruction that happens when the individual self loses this orientation. The text uses Shakespeare's tragic heroes as prime case studies.
Shakespeare was arguably the greatest psychologist in English literature. He understood the mechanics of the nafs perfectly.
Look at Macbeth. He is given a prophecy, but instead of trusting the timeline, his ambition and his wife's prodding push him to author the outcome himself through murder. He tries to seize the crown, and it unravels his sanity. Or Othello, whose entire sense of self is so fragile that the mere suggestion of betrayal by Iago turns him into a monster of jealousy.
And King Lear.
Yes, King Lear, whose ego demands performative flattery from his daughters, leading him to banish the only one who truly loves him. These are massive, capable souls who are completely destroyed because they place their ego at the center of reality, severing both their vertical alignment and their horizontal relationships.
It's tragic, but it's such a clear example of unchecked ego.
Okay, I am tracking with all of this. The philosophy is gorgeous. The bridge between theology and psychology is intellectually airtight. But I have to stop us here, because I have read 100 self-help books, and I have felt this exact same sense of enlightenment while sitting on my couch with a cup of coffee.
Oh, I know where this is going.
But the moment I merge onto the highway and someone violently cuts me off in traffic, or the moment I get an email from my boss criticizing a project I spent 6 months on, all this beautiful philosophy evaporates instantly.
Poof, gone.
The nafs flares up, the chest tightens, and I am back to being a stressed-out, defensive animal trying to author my reality. How do we actually operationalize this? How do we survive the collision with reality?
That is the most critical question of this entire deep dive.
Yeah.
A philosophy that only functions in a serene, controlled environment is entirely useless for the human condition.
Exactly.
You need a mechanism that works in the boardroom, in traffic, and in the kitchen when the kids are melting down. And the sources do not leave us hanging. They provide the fifth and final goal of the Declaration, a practical rhythm of remembrance. They call it the 5 R's.
Recognize, receive, respond, release, and return.
Yes.
The text refers to this process as dhikr, the Islamic concept of remembrance put into daily action. It is the moment-by-moment mechanism for shifting control away from the ego, the nafs, and back to the soul, the ruh.
And what is truly spectacular about the 5 R's is how flawlessly they map onto modern neurobiology. The sources bring in the work of Dr. Dan Siegel, a clinical professor of psychiatry. He coined a term called mindsight.
Mindsight, what is that?
Mindsight is the learned capacity to observe our own internal mental states without immediately reacting to them or being swept away by them. It is the difference between saying, I am angry, and I feel anger arising in me. The 5 R's are a structured spiritual protocol for activating mindsight in real time.
Let's not just list these out. I want to pressure test this framework.
Let's do it.
Let's run a real stressful scenario through the 5 R's and look at the neurological mechanics. Let's say it's 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. I am sitting in a performance review. My boss looks across the table and tells me that my work has been subpar, my leadership is lacking, and I am being passed over for the promotion I was counting on.
Ouch. That's a tough situation.
Right. In that exact second, my amygdala is screaming. My chest is tight. The nafs wants to either yell at my boss or crumble into shame. Step 1 of the framework is recognize. What am I doing in that moment?
In that split second of intense friction, you pause and you recognize your intrinsic identity. You silently remind yourself, I am an honored Abdullah. My worth is settled by God. This review is feedback on my performance, not a verdict on my soul.
What is happening in my brain when I do that?
Neurologically, this intentional pause and recall activates your prefrontal cortex, the evolutionary newest part of your brain responsible for complex reasoning, perspective-taking, and self-awareness. By deliberately engaging the prefrontal cortex, you interrupt the automatic, reflexive panic of the limbic system. You are literally stepping out of the biological stream of reactivity and creating a gap.
Okay, I have created the gap. My worth is secure. Step 2 is receive. I'm sitting in the chair. What am I receiving?
You receive the present moment exactly as it is without fighting it, denying it, or catastrophizing it. You practice what the sources call faithful presence. You are not defending yourself, you are not planning your counterattack, and you are not playing out a scenario where you get fired and lose your house. You accept the reality of the room. My boss is disappointed. I am not getting the promotion. This is what is happening right now.
This step makes me think of Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now.
Oh, totally.
Tolle hammers the point that psychological suffering is almost always created by our resistance to the present moment. We suffer because we are living in the memory of the past or the imagination of the future. The present moment, the actual tangible reality of sitting in a chair listening to words, is usually entirely manageable.
Exactly. When you receive reality without resistance, you send a powerful signal down your vagus nerve to dampen the amygdala's threat response.
Yeah.
You are telling your nervous system, we are physically safe. This is an uncomfortable professional situation, not an existential threat.
All right, my amygdala is calming down. I am present. Now I have to actually do something. Step 3 is respond.
Yes, because your identity is secure, that's recognized, and you are grounded in reality, you can now respond. And you respond from the posture of a trustee. Your effort is an act of worship, an expression of the Aman.
So instead of reacting defensively, like, you never gave me the resources I needed, I respond faithfully. I hear your feedback. Can we identify the specific gap so I can improve my execution on the next project?
Neurologically, this engages your high-level executive function. You are choosing a behavior aligned with your deepest values, rather than reacting out of a primitive fear of rejection.
There's a fantastic sports analogy the sources use here, citing legendary college football coach Lou Holtz. He taught his players an acronym, WIN.
Yeah, it stands for what's important now. If you are a quarterback and you just threw a terrible interception and you were down by 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, you cannot carry the psychological weight of the past mistake, and you cannot obsess over the fear of losing the game in 10 minutes. You have to focus 100% of your cognitive capacity on the exact faithful response required right now. What is the play call? Where's the linebacker? What's important now?
It focuses all your energy on the effort, which is the only thing you control. And once you have delivered that faithful response, you must immediately transition to step 4, release. This is the hardest part. I leave the review, I responded well, but now I have to release the outcome. I have to accept that I didn't get the promotion, and I'd have to release my boss's opinion of me to God. I tie the camel, and I surrender the result.
This is the physiological exhale. In the brain, intentionally releasing the outcome stops the rumination loop. Rumination is what keeps cortisol, the stress hormone, pumping through your veins for days after an event. If you don't release the outcome, you will lie awake at 2 a.m. replaying the conversation, trying to figure out how to manipulate your boss's perception tomorrow.
Yeah.
But when you genuinely hand the result over to the ultimate author, the cortisol drops, the root exhales.
Recognize, receive, respond, release. It is a stunning, elegant protocol. It is literally a roadmap for sanity.
It really is.
But I have to ask the most cynical, realistic question of this entire deep dive. What happens when I fail at this?
Because you will.
Because, let's be honest, I am going to drift. Tomorrow morning, I might not make it past step 1. I will get cut off in traffic, my ego will flare up, I will yell, my chest will tighten, and I will spend an hour being miserable. The ego is incredibly sneaky and deeply ingrained. If this framework requires perfection, I am already disqualified.
And that is exactly why the framework does not end at release. The 5th R is the ultimate safety net, and it is arguably the most compassionate and profound mechanism in the entire declaration. The 5th R is return.
Return.
Yes. Drifting is fundamentally human. Forgetting is human. In fact, the Arabic word for human, insan, shares a root with the word for forgetfulness. The Islamic concept of the straight path, Sirat al-Mustaqim, is profoundly misunderstood.
How so?
It is not a final destination where you arrive, set up a tent, and never make a mistake again. It is an orientation. It is a compass heading. You will wobble. You will get pulled off course by your nafs, by fear, by anger, but the path is always there beneath your feet, and the divine invitation to return is permanent and open.
The sources draw a brilliant literary parallel here to Dante's Divine Comedy. On the surface, it's a 14th century epic poem about the afterlife, but psychologically, it is the archetypal journey of the human soul. The poem begins with Dante waking up in a dark wood, realizing he has strayed from the straight way. He is lost.
And to get back to the light, he cannot just teleport to paradise. He has to descend. He has to walk through the inferno. He has to confront his own shadows, his own ego, and the darkest parts of human nature. Then he has to undertake the grueling climb of purgatorio, the process of purification and habit building before he can finally return to paradiso in line with the divine will.
It requires humility. When I yell in traffic, I have to descend into my own fallibility. I have to admit, wow, my ego completely took over. I thought I was in charge of the highway. And then I have to return. I make repentance to God. And if I snapped at my kids in the car, I apologize to them to repair the horizontal axis.
Neurologically, the act of returning, specifically the act of repair with others, re-engages the social nervous system. It heals the rupture. The willingness to admit you drifted and to reorient yourself without drowning in shame is the very essence of spiritual maturity. Peace is not perfection. Peace is simply the willingness to return, over and over again.
That reframing is a massive relief. I am not being evaluated on whether I maintain an unbroken streak of perfect zen. I am evaluated on my willingness to come back.
Exactly.
Well, we have covered immense ground today. We've traversed 17th century philosophy, the Holocaust, corporate strategy, Stoicism, modern neurobiology, and ancient Islamic theology.
It's been quite the journey.
It really has. And when you step back and look at the bridge built between these diverse sources, a single profoundly liberating truth emerges. You are not your thoughts. You are not your career achievements. You are not the size of your bank account. And you are certainly not the outcomes of your efforts.
You are an entrusted servant. You were dignified by your Creator before you ever took your first breath or accomplished a single thing. You have been handed a sacred trust, your life, your talents, your time, and you are called to steward those gifts with fearless excellence, to treat humanity with radical compassion, and then, crucially, to release the heavy, impossible burden of authorship back into the hands of God.
This is not just an abstract philosophical theory to ponder on a Sunday. It is a biological, physiological, and spiritual rescue plan. To the person listening to this right now, you can literally drop the burden of trying to be the author of the universe. You can start trying to write the script, direct the actors, and guarantee the ending. You can just focus on playing your part beautifully, cleanly, right here in this exact moment.
It represents the fundamental shift from a life paralyzed by performative anxiety to a life anchored in entrusted peace.
I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. We hear modern thinkers, sociologists, and, commentators talk endlessly about the crisis of meaning in today's world. They say we are a generation wandering in the dark, desperate to invent a purpose for our lives. But what if there actually is no crisis of meaning? What if the meaning of your life is already permanently established and perfectly secure? What if it is simply a crisis of memory?
A crisis of memory.
Yeah. We haven't lost our meaning, we've just forgotten the one who entrusted it to us. The next time you feel that familiar tightness in your chest, that rising panic of trying to prove your worth to a world that will never be satisfied, don't try to fight it. Just take a breath. Recognize the frantic hum of your own ego, and simply remember whose theater you are actually standing in.